Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show, by any host, or by any guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before you begin any new diet, exercise, or training program. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. On Healing Ties, we're creating a life to love after caregiving ends by sharing stories and resources and being with awesome people like you. Now that caregiving has ended, let the Healing Ties begin. Here's your host, Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy.
Well, greetings everyone. It is Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy, for another episode of Healing Ties, and we're going to do something just a little bit different today. I don't want to call it a simulcast, but we're going to be doing a dual podcast today with a good friend, Ryan McNniff. How did I do with that last name, Ryan?
You did amazing. Thank you.
Ryan has a podcast called The Caregiver's Toolbox, and Ryan, we got to introduce, like a lot of us in the caregiving world, we know somebody knows a friend, and then we get connected, and that's kind of how you and I got connected, through our mutual contact and friend, Elizabeth Miller, who does Happy Healthy Caregiver. Welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, I reached out to Miss Miller and said, hey, we should try to get together maybe once, maybe twice, 3 times, do some podcasts together. And that's when I realized about the Whole Care Network. And I was like, oh, wow, there are a lot of podcasts on this one. And that's how we got hooked up, where I was like, hey, you really need to speak with Chris. And I like the whole bow tie guy thing. You know, there's something in life you need to stand out some way, somehow. And that mustache and that bow tie are certainly a good way to do so. So I like it.
I'm feeling my marketing, testing my marketing waters. But the bow tie guy has been something that I don't know. I coined that a few years ago. In fact, here's some information, useless information for you. I started wearing bow ties on my 40th birthday, so that'd be 21 years ago. I know my older sisters are going to hate me saying that, but that's okay.
Oops.
And I haven't worn a straight tie since. Now, some people would take that and look in another area, but we're just having fun with it today.
So what was the well, I'm going to ask the question, I guess. What was the catalyst that went from the kind of more traditional tie to the bow tie that had kind of fallen out of fashionable favor over the last 100 years, unless you're going to a black tie event?
There you go. Well, I think it was 2 things. My father always wore bow ties, so I'd always been attracted to them. But when I was 40 years old, I weighed almost 300 pounds. And I was finding a lot of food stains on my tie. So I went to the bow tie and took off all the weight as well. And I've never, in fact, I don't even think I own a straight tie anymore. I took some of those straight ties and had them made into bow ties. So,
oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's how I've become the bow tie guy. So when social media started, that was my tagline. And
yeah, because people don't remember you. It takes probably 50 times for somebody to remember your name. And your name is kind of a standard Irish name that can be kind of mixed up with hundreds, if not thousands, of other types of names. But everybody's going to just easily remember the bow tie guy. I remember that, bow tie guy.
It was fun. I was at an event yesterday in Tampa, the Caregiver Accelerator program. And a fellow who we've been Facebook friends for years, Peter Rosenberger. He had a terrific caregiving show. He's a caregiver advocate for over 30 years. And we had never met in person. And we seemed to arrive at the right time. He looked right at me. He says, "The bow tie guy, I've been looking forward to meeting you." So luckily,
yeah.
There's no other bow tie guy there. But
no, and I agree, because I was always, people would come up to me, especially when I had hair. I had bright red hair, and they would be like, I'm going to name you Big Red. And I'd be like, wow, you're the first person ever. The 6'6" guy that can lift a car over his head that has red hair. Like crazy way to come up with that name. But everybody, even people in college, they probably didn't even know my real name because everybody just knew you about as the big, tall, red guy that everybody called Big Red. So and whenever I go into places, people still remember that. They'll, oh, hey, Red, even though I have no hair, my face turns bright red and I get red. You can see me right now. I'm redder than a tomato sometimes. So, it's funny how those things stick on to you and they make the marketing a little bit more easier.
Never a dull moment. Well, it's what's great about having conversations like this, Ryan, is that without really knowing each other, we do know each other because we've been in this caregiving sphere, and we all can relate to our stories, whether or not you have a bow tie on or not. And
absolutely,
I'd certainly like you to go first and tell our listeners about your story and how you got into the field of caregiving, especially your home health care.
Yeah. So, I find a lot of people that get involved in senior care and healthcare in general generally have a story. Basically, mine was I grew up basically 5 miles from where I'm sitting in Concord, Mass. My parents, like many, as they so eloquently call us, massholes, moved on down to Florida where you're located. They moved about an hour and a half north of where you're at in a place called Beverly Hills, Florida, which is nothing like the Beverly Hills of California. And I moved out to Colorado to snowboard, and grass is always greener. Check out the world. And my mom, unfortunately, was a heavy smoker, and that caught up to her very early. And we got a call that she had had a seizure, and it was really more of a situation of where the cancer wasn't than where it was. It was everywhere. She was stage 4. So basically I packed up my things, rented out my condo, and I moved to Florida to be with her because I'm an only child. My dad and my mom are fortunately still married, but they needed all the support they could get. And I moved down there to basically spend the last, what we thought was 8 months to 12 months with my mom, but it ended up only being about 3 or 4 months. And, we needed 24-hour home care. We eventually needed hospice. And as I kind of said off air to you, it's just that regardless of if you're a caregiver for a week or for a year, one thing you all experience is that fire hose of information that gets just shot at you where you're trying to figure out, well, what is all these different resources and what happens? And, in our industry and our professions, you find that a lot of people don't plan. And my parents were the norm. They didn't plan. It was something they didn't think about would happen when one of them was 64 years old. So I'm trying to make a long story short. During that phase of my mom being sick is when my aunt was involved and family was involved, and she owned Minute Women Home Care, which she had been looking for somebody to buy it for years. And I said, let me take a crack at it for 6 months. If I like it, we'll figure out a payment plan. And I loved owning it. I love owning a business. I love caring for people and helping people. We have a wall of thank you cards. That's always nice when you're frustrated and ripping out the final hair out of your head because you're frustrated with a caregiver. You can go over the wall and remember while you're doing this.
Yes.
But and that's how I got involved in private home care. I never thought in a million years I'd be doing private home care. There wasn't anything I had ever thought about, but sometimes, like one of the things I say, my mom's last gift was to be able to let me buy a business because I always wanted to be a business owner. I always hated people telling me what to do. So this profession works out quite well.
My listeners have always heard me say this, but I think I know the answer to this question with you is, have you ever met anybody that had caregiving on their bucket list of things that they want to do in life?
Yeah, that's never a thing that's on the bucket list of things you want to do, because it's obviously with generally a very close family member, and you're dealing with them at their most vulnerable time of their life when they're in major need, and ideally you're in a position where you can help them bounce back. But in a lot of times you're dealing with a disease. In this case, it was cancer, that that there's there's going to be no good outcome, and it's just try to make the situation as tolerable as possible. But I don't regret being there. I quit my job, and it was great to go down there and be with my mom, and I know she was absolutely thrilled that I was there to be able to help her out. Because go ahead.
And that's, I think that's what binds all of us together as caregivers, even though we all have these caregiving stories, and caregivers connect to the stories, and we have this innate ability to understand each other, even though our journey is just a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was fortunate enough to not have kids. I was relatively young. I was 28 years old when this all happened. So I was still very nimble enough to be able to say, hey, you know what? I can up and quit my job and rent out my condo and just move. Versus, there are a lot of people out there, and I'm sure you experience it, where they want to be able to do that, but they have a wife and kids or a husband or a partner. They have commitments, regardless of what those are, that are keeping them where they can't just go move. And they can't just, go and be a caregiver. So that's where private home care and some of the other things come along and helping people.
And I'd be interested to know, from my experience, it was always hard to accept help, but help is so important when you're in the midst of caregiving, and that's what you provide.
Yeah, we certainly see that. And with my mom, I think she knew that she needed help. She knew that this was very serious, that there was no hope in this situation, and that we were going to need help. So that wasn't much of a fight, but we certainly see all the time with older adults. Usually the people usually it's the daughters that are calling us. They've been stretched thin. They're stressed out of their minds, and they need help, and they're trying to convince their parent to accept that help, even though the parent might have, not have safety awareness and doesn't think they need it, or is fighting it tooth and nail, or by accepting help, that's admitting that they're getting older and they're no longer, invincible, if you will. Mm-hmm. So we see that a lot with a lot of our clients, that the older adult just doesn't think they need help unless the situation is dire enough where, they're on hospice or they know that they have a terminal disease. Then, the reality of what's happening sets in a little bit quicker.
Well, and everybody wants to have their independence for as long as they possibly can, but finding that balance between independence and safety for both the caregiver and the care recipient, it's a delicate balance, especially as you well know, when it's a family member.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tough, and it's already a stressful situation as it is, because you're watching, a family member decline, and you're scared that this decline isn't going to stop, but you need help because you have so many other responsibilities, including your own children. That's the big one is work is important without a doubt, but usually these families have other children involved that are young enough that they can't just leave them at home every single night and care for somebody. That's a parent's responsibility. Your number one responsibility is to your kids, and then secondly, its responsibility might be to your significant other, your spouse, and then it's your parents. So the parents aren't always number one on the list of things in the whole hierarchy of who you're supposed to care for initially. But every culture is different and everybody's different. But nowadays, everybody's working 2 jobs. They have the 2.3 kids. They have a house that's I'm in Lexington. Just to buy a house in Lexington's $1 million. I mean, you got a lot of responsibilities and mortgages to pay, and then you got to figure out how you're going to care for an older adult. So it's a situation that obviously you have a whole website dedicated to all the difficulties of that and the intricacies of that and the different strategies, problems, hurdles that you have to go over. Ours is one of many different options that people have of being able to hire somebody to come in the home for a few hours a day or up to 24 hours a day.
First of all, I appreciate you saying that about the Whole Care Network and the website. What we try to do is share stories. I personally believe that it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to combat a common cause, and that common cause is caregiving. we connect the stories, and usually within a story there's a resource or a referral that a caregiver can have. Just, for instance, us chatting today, I would imagine, at least I would hope so, that some of our listeners would be who are on the fence about having help in the home would feel a little bit more comfortable by knowing that there's somebody like you that that's been a caregiver, that's giving back to the caregiving community through, having a home healthcare business like this, because you've been in the trenches, you understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that happened to me is, we had good caregivers. We had lazy caregivers. We were getting around-the-clock care. So when you're doing around-the-clock care, you have 8 to 9 caregivers in your house every week because you can't go over to overtime, or most people don't want to. And so you get your, you get your A's, your B's, and your C's. And, you have to call up the 24-hour agency or whatever and say, hey, you know what, we don't want this C caregiver anymore. We want to try to find somebody else. Now, after my mom passed away, we found out that her and my dad's 401k was trying to be accessed. And it wasn't from me. It wasn't from my dad because he had access to it, and my mom was obviously gone by then. So the only other people in the house regularly were caregivers. Now, do we know for sure it was a caregiver? No, we don't, but those are those types of experiences that you see some of the good, you see a lot of good, you see and experience a little bad, and then when I took over this company, I wanted to be as honest and say, hey, listen, just because my caregivers are background checked nationally and all these different things doesn't mean that you just leave $1,000 sitting on the table, and there's no guarantees in life who's going to be honest and who's not. So, we try to talk to people when somebody's entering their home, make sure that those valuables are locked up, make sure those things are, that information that is really important and is sensitive is put into a $50 lockbox that you can buy at Walmart. That will save those diamond earrings that will go missing or could go missing. Lock them up, and then that they're not going to go away, and hopefully your loved one understands that it's still available, but they're just not in the same place. So that's like a small experience that I took from with me that I tell all of my clients, and I hope I don't scare them to death, but at the same time, it's better to be proactive than reactive.
And that's, boy, did you say it right there. And that's really, as it relates to caregiving, the whole caregiving sphere, it's if we could be proactive instead of reactive, have somewhat of a plan in place, especially as it relates to a conversation that a lot of us find difficult to have, is that advanced directives, what kind of care would you like to have? Being proactive about some of these difficult conversations makes or in a already stressful situation just a little less stressful because you're able to act from a plan. Yeah,
absolutely. And I don't know what you recommend down there if you're out, but I've always liked the 5 wishes.
Excellent. Yeah.
And it's something that's maybe what it takes an hour out of your day to do that whole thing. And we've seen it, I'm sure you've seen it, where you have situations where maybe family members that weren't as close all of a sudden roll in at the last minute and start saying, Mom didn't want it that way, or my sister didn't want it that way. And it's like, no, we spent an hour to get this 5 wishes done, and this is exactly what she wanted. We all signed off of it. I'm the power of attorney, or I have I can't think of the word, the executive privilege, or the healthcare proxy is what I was thinking.
Healthcare proxy, yeah.
And this is how it's going to go. And if you don't like it, that's not my problem. This is what Mom wanted. And that makes life a lot easier, where we've had, as a home care company, we've seen some of these horror stories with families where they start, squawking at each other, and you're like, guys, we got to step away. You need to figure this out. Then you can call us up, and we can try to help out at this point.
We have a show host on the network. Her name is Amanda Singleton, and I'd love to introduce you to Amanda. She's known as the Caregiver lawyer.
Yep.
And she has quite the story about, she had been a trial attorney the majority of her career, And she got a call one day that her mother was sick. And long story short, even as an attorney, her mother hadn't had all the documents set in place.
Yeah.
And of course, being an attorney, she was able to, I say this word kindly, work the system. She knew how to work the system.
Sure.
But she has, from that experience, she has changed her entire practice. And now her practice is solely dedicated to caregivers and making sure that caregivers have all the proper documents in order. Because this is a line from one of our podcasts, where there's a will, there's a relative. And but firstly, I say that in jest, but when you have the documents in order and you can produce them at the time of I'll say question instead of a controversy.
Yeah,
they do help, but there's so many people that don't have these documents in place.
Yeah, no, we can go down a rabbit hole if we want a little bit, but like we obviously all hear about the amount of debt this country's in, and the number one thing about that is healthcare, right? It's right. Medicare, it's Medicaid. Well, one of the things that it causes a massive money suck is when somebody doesn't have health directives. Well, the hospital has to keep them alive, so that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars very quickly. That that maybe that person would have said, hey, you know what? DNR me, let's get this train out of here. But they didn't have the proper documents, or the families didn't know, so the hospitals have to do what by law, I believe, what is they got to keep them alive as long as possible, even if they didn't like it because they can't prove it. So there's an example of somebody not getting the wishes that they want. It costs a lot of money, and it puts the family under stress.
So we just have a couple of minutes left in today's podcast, but Brian, I would really like to do a series with you. I think it would be terrific to come up with a number of topics that are applicable to caregivers, and especially as it relates to selecting home health care and how you go about selecting the right home health care business.
Yeah. We can definitely
because it's important. It's an important process, and you're somebody that you're providing the service, and I would think that even just within your area, we could certainly help people make better and informed decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always happy to do that. I mean, I would recommend to anybody out there listening, just give a call to a private agency and ask some questions. Just say, hey, listen, I'm at the beginning start of this. I'm probably not going to sign a contract any set time soon, but I need to get my ducks in a row here. And I think you'll find that if agencies more than happy to speak with you, that's a good start right there. The whole reason I started my podcast and started doing this, the blogs and all that stuff, was because I was blown away by how few people had a plan or were not knowledgeable about it. So I figured, well, hey, the internet's the greatest revolution we've seen in the last 20, 30 years. So let's try it for information. Let's try to get that information out there so people can learn. So, but since this is going to be on my podcast as well, if we can maybe run over by a few minutes, I want my listeners to know what it's all about Whole Care Network, why they should check it out, what your mission is, and kind of go through on what WCN is.
Well, I appreciate that, Ryan, and we can go as long as we want today because we're in charge. But,
there we go.
But the Whole Care Network is actually a result of my caregiving experience. In this vast network of caregiving, where do you find your niche? My professional background has been in social work and ministry, especially as it relates to crisis counseling and information and referral. And as I look from my these vast network of caregivers, for me, it's about sharing stories and experiences. People connect to stories. And what we're doing on the Whole Care Network is bringing podcasters together who have a story to share, a resource to provide. And, with that, we hope to build a network that where caregivers can come, pick out a show host or a show that they enjoy listening to, find the resources they need to get through their caregiving day, and be a part of the community. We're just approaching our 1-year anniversary with the Whole Care Network. I started podcasting in 2012 after my partner was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and we were fortunate to have our story told by the South Florida Sun Sentinel in Sickness and Health: A Couple's Final Journey. That story was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in 2015, and that really propelled me into this area of caregiving, is sharing the story. The story is still available online. I encourage all your listeners to take a look at it. The unique thing about the story, why it was so successful, is that it really talked about love, care, and commitment. And I think any caregiver, no matter if you're black or white, gay or straight, whatever culture you come from, it all comes down to love, care, and commitment. And we want to be able to do that as best as we can. So I'm fortunate to be able to visit with you and share this little bit of tidbit of story that, from my journey. But I also believe that we're in a strange way, we're all in this journey together, because goodness, caregivers are the backbone of the healthcare in America. And without folks like you and caregivers, we'd be all lost. And that's why it's, for me, coming full throttle 4 years after caregiving has ended, being able to share the story. I certainly hope that if I touch one person through our story, then I know that I've done some good.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I've read that piece or that story with you and your partner, and it certainly it hit many different levels on how difficult it is to be a caregiver, but it certainly is worth the read. It's certainly sad, and it's happy, all wrapped into one. There's the peaks and valleys of any relationship, and it certainly speaks to that quite well. But also to check out one of the things when I was checking out the Whole Care Network is just the sheer amount of content that you have for people. And I do all the content myself, whether it's the podcast, I do some videos, I do some blogging. I think I'm more jack of all trades, master of none. I don't think I do any really good. But
that's another area we connect in.
Yeah. But, I'm sure people can go through my blogs and find plenty of grammatical errors. There's no doubt. And I even proofread them too, which is the worst part. But anyways, the point I'm getting to is that when you see the amount of shows that you have just on the broadcasting side, maybe you're not interested in the Caregiver's Toolbox from my perspective of how I view an industry. Maybe somebody doesn't find that interesting. That's okay. But you have 15 different shows. Or broadcasts that somebody out there who's interested in caregiving is going to find something ideally that they're going to resonate with.
I appreciate that. And that's what we're trying to do. And we'd love to have the Caregiving Toolbox on the Whole Care Network as well.
We've talked about this, I know.
But no, and it is about having a voice. And let's face it, not everybody's going to connect to everybody's story. But just like in caregiving, 4 eyes are better than 2, 6 eyes are better than 4. The more people you have involved, the more people that you can reach, and that's really our goal with the Whole Care Network.
No, and it makes sense. It definitely does. So I definitely think people should check that out. Just type in Whole Care Network and you'll be able to see your broadcast. And then I'm sure if you go to your podcast, which is Healing Ties, I'm sure there's a link. I'm sure there's a link somewhere in there to your caregiving story that we were talking about as well.
Actually, there's a couple of ways to find the story. You will see it on the Healing Ties, but as you access the Whole Care Network, you'll see the About section. Just look for my name, Christopher McClellan, and that'll have a link to the story as well. And you'll see a little bit more of my journey, where I started blogging on a website that's still active called The Purple Jacket. That's another part of the weight story, because I do have a purple jacket, but haven't been able to fit into it because of I blame the caregiving thing on it, the caregiving stress. But that's kind of how I started with all the content, and now we're moved over to the Whole Care Network, and we want to care for the whole person, and that's what because caregiving impacts the whole person.
Yep, and the whole family and a lot of people. So
yep.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think it's good, and I think people should check that out. And definitely, there's just a time. It's not just the broadcasting. You have the blogs. You have a lot of different stuff on there. So that's
a lot of stuff going. And I'm amazed that just be our first year anniversary in November. What's transpired with very little social media, but. It's my passion, and that's I appreciate you sharing with your listeners, and I appreciate your interest in being a part of the network.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely go offline and talk about some ways that we can collaborate in the near future, and certainly we can have our discussions about WCN. But I think it's good. You seem like a great guy, and I'm glad that there's another kind of representative out there that's trying to, educate people that, hey, listen, death and taxes, they're both guaranteed. How about we prepare for not just one of them, but for both of them? Like, we're all gonna go through this process in some way, so we might as well be proactive about it. But easier said than done, I know.
And when you have two Macs on one show, the Macs have it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm surprised we haven't yelled at each other yet with that Irish temper that we have, right? I'm going to go leave and drink a beer and have an Irish breakfast. I hope you have a good one there.
Bangers and mash for lunch. So.
Absolutely. There we go.
Oh, this has been terrific, Ryan. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me, and we'll definitely collaborate in the future.
What a great visit with Ryan this morning, and I encourage all of our listeners to visit Ryan online at mwhomecare.com. That's mwhomecare.com, and you can listen to Ryan's own podcast called The Caregiver's Toolbox. You can find that on his website, and we're hoping Ryan joins the Whole Care Network here real soon. You can also touch base with Ryan on Twitter at GetBigRed. That's on Twitter at GetBigRed, and Ryan's email address is ryan@mwhomecare.com. As you know, I'm your host, Chris McClellan, the Bowtie Guy. I'm creating a life to love after caregiving ends through radio, writing, travel, advocacy, and being with awesome people like Ryan McNniff. Healing Ties is a part of the Whole Care Network. Check us out online at thewholecarenetwork.com. We'll see you for another episode of Healing Ties real soon. Bye-bye.